teachers, pianists, colleagues, and friends. Today we're talking about how to teach the Beethoven Sonatina in G major, the second movement, the Romanze, or Romance. It sounds like this. If we haven't met before, my name is Jana Williamson and welcome to my home piano studio in the suburbs of Chicago. Last week I featured the first movement of this piece. If you have not checked that video out yet, either click right up there in the corner or in the description of this video to get access to that. There are many features of this movement which are similar or the same as the first movement. We're in the key of G. We're using a lot of the G major primary chord patterns. We have this right hand melody over the left hand accompaniment. So there are many things that cross over. And in fact, one of the biggest challenges of both of these movements is the grace notes. I'm not going to address grace notes in this video because I talked about them for quite some time in that previous video. So please do check that out for some teaching tips on those ornaments. As I mentioned before, this piece does show up on my Method to Masterworks resource. If you haven't checked that out, go into the description of this video to take a look at that. It's gotten a lot of really great feedback recently, teachers who found this to be very helpful. It's a spreadsheet and a video that help you bridge the gap between beginning piano study in a method book, for instance, and intermediate study. So do check that out. The main differences between this movement and the previous one, and there are just two movements in the Sonatina, are the meter. This is in 6/8 time or compound meter, feeling the beat divided into 3 versus feeling it divided into 2. And the type of accompaniment patterns that then happen in the left hand because we're dividing that beat into 3. So we have this waltz bass pattern, or simply 3-note broken chords. And so that's the main difference. We don't have the same use of the chords, and that's one of the reasons I actually like teaching both of the movements of this piece. I'm a big fan of students at the late elementary, early intermediate level learning their chord progressions, understanding the basic primary chords and any of the keys that they're going to play in, and then very quickly recognizing the accompaniment patterns that we find throughout all kinds of repertoire of all eras. So yes, the waltz bass is going to be one of the first accompaniment patterns that I teach, and we encounter it right at the very beginning of this piece. Knowing those accompaniment patterns is also very valuable for reading lead sheets and being able to arrange melodies, whether they are folk tunes or pop tunes, from an early level. So it's a skill that applies across all kinds of parts of piano teaching and one that I find to be most important. So let's go back to compound meter for a minute. As I said, the time signature is 6/8 time, which means if you read it literally, 6 beats in a measure and the 8th note gets the beat. And that is very easily visible in this piece because so many of the measures have 6/8 notes in the right hand or 6/8 notes in the left hand, or both. We do, of course, have some other rhythms, and students need to understand that the quarter note gets 2 beats if you're thinking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and that the dotted quarter note, of course, gets 3. But the most important thing with compound meter is that students understand that we are feeling the beat in the dotted quarter note, or feeling, in this case, 2 beats per measure, that it's these units of 2 beats for each half measure. And that's why understanding that waltz bass is partly so important, because you can see 2 chords in measure 1, that first chord, and that second chord, and that's half of the measure. 1 and a 2 and a. Then it becomes much simpler to understand, and they're not counting to 6 every time. They also then feel this as a dance in the lilting 1 and a 2 and a. Speaking of chords, if you have older students who are learning about secondary dominants or 5 of 5 chords, which I have some right now who will encounter the idea of secondary dominants on their upcoming theory tests, then this would actually be a great piece for students who are more advanced to use as chord analysis. We encounter multiple secondary dominants right from measure 3, that A7 chord, going to D. It's not in root position, so there's a second, hoop for them to jump through to understand what that is. It's more obvious down in measure 5. We get a G7 chord going to C major at the downbeat of measure 6. So that's that 5 of 4. And then we do get the A7 to D again in measure 11 and 12. So this is a great piece to look for secondary dominance and just help your older students who are doing this theory kind of think about, how do I analyze that chord? As soon as I see that accidental, what is that telling me? Where does that chord lead to? And what I always tell my students is you cannot analyze, for instance, in the key of G major, an A7 chord is not a capital Roman numeral 2. That chord does not exist. That does not explain the relationship. It is a 5 of 5 or a 5/7 of 5 or a secondary dominant. All right, so let's go on to other specifics about this piece. We do have several G major scale patterns in this, and I would suggest that your student use a good quality student edition for this piece, even though of course you can find it online for free because it's in the public domain. I am looking at this in the Festival Collection Book 3, and overall I like Helen Marlay's fingering. I feel free to change the things that I don't like. If you are interested in checking out that book, please click the link in the description of this video. I do really like her scale fingerings. So for instance, looking at the middle of bar 8, 3 over, 2. I think a lot of the fingering that she recommends allows for natural emphasis on the stronger beats, as well as borrows from standard scale fingering, so it's going to be easy for your student to play. That is one of the harder things about this movement. It does not stay static within one G major hand position, for instance. It does move around quite a bit with the right hand. Another example is measure 5. But that actually is right within a 1-octave G major scale. So hopefully your students already practiced those and is comfortable with the idea of a thumb moving up to C and then coming back down to your thumb being on G. With that right hand melody and the left hand accompaniment, we do have to work with this waltz bass in particular about having a very light thumb in the left hand, light thirds and seconds to make papa, papa, papa. Because you can very easily have students play and then it's lost all of the gracefulness and all of the beauty to it. If you haven't tried ghost practice with your student, this might be a great first way to do it. Ghost practice is where the melody hand plays normally and the accompanimental hand is a ghost, just playing on top of the keys, not actually depressing the keys and making any sound. And then you just allow the accompanimental hand to sneak in so you just barely hear it. And this is pretty much a magic practice technique, but it is one that is difficult, that students do not like doing, especially at first, until they understand how valuable it is. The right hand, of course, should shape those phrases beautifully. Beethoven has several phrases where it naturally ascends up to the peak where you want to get louder and then descends and you get softer. In my edition, I have several hairpins marked. So if your student is just following those markings, they should be making the phrases sound beautiful automatically. And I do just want to mention that there is this quasi-cadenza about halfway through this piece with a fermata on a big dramatic D7 chord, a 5/7 chord. And you have to encourage your students to enjoy this. These things can look odd to them and they can sometimes shy away from making them dramatic, but if you make it more dramatic rather than less or kind of apologize for it, then it's much more effective and enjoyable for the listener. So in measure 16, pick up to 17, we're starting the first dominant seventh, and then we have a second with the right hand being raised pitch, and then you get the last one, which is marked forte with a fermata, so you have to really play it and hold it, and then lift and go on. And then you're back to the dolce, graceful A section again. Beethoven seems to like to do this. If you check out my video featuring the second movement of the F major sonatina, there is also a little cadenza in that as well. And in that video, I talk about how important it is for our students to understand what concertos are. You could do a quick listen, find a really great YouTube video of a solo pianist in front of an orchestra, show them what a concerto is, show them a cadenza, from a Beethoven concerto would work great, and how it's the soloist's moment to really shine, perhaps improvise back in the day, to do virtuosic technical things all over the keyboard, to kind of show off for a moment before coming back in with the orchestra to finish up the movement. So for your students who naturally are kind of dramatic people and have a lot of personality, they can really enjoy that because that's just going to tap into who they are. For your students who are quieter and maybe a little bit more uncomfortable with, showing a lot of emotion or being dramatic, then I oftentimes just ask them to think of one of their friends or family members who is overly dramatic and just ask, can you pretend to be that person for a minute now? And for my high schoolers, I will oftentimes say, do you have any theater friends? Because as soon as I say that, they're like, oh yes, of course, I have the one theater friend who is over dramatic about everything. You could also come up with some sort of story with a dramatic moment, why we're pausing here, and then why we're going back to the rest of it. Sonatinas are great for stories because you can come up with the various characters in the story, and this is so sectioned off into these 4 sections: the A, the B with the cadenza, back to A, and then our nice little coda where we finish everything off nicely, and so it can be a great moment for imagination and exploration with your student. I hope that gives you a few tips on teaching this second movement of this Beethoven Sonatina. If you found this content valuable, please share it with a colleague or a friend. Hit the like button and subscribe, and I wish you all the best in your teaching and playing.